welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now to discuss the state of the nation and several headline issues over the past week is public affairs analyst Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi.
Good morning, Doctor. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Biola and Tudun. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good morning. I wanted to start with a topic that actually rocked us yesterday that we talked about, which was the fires in Onitsha and the response. Yesterday, we saw that the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs did go to Onitsha to respond on behalf of the president. I wanted us to talk a little bit about that particular issue, the fact that there were subsequent issues as well. There were subsequent fires as well, and also just how we deal with these type of tragedies in our country going forward.
Thanks, Biola, and very good morning to viewers. It's actually very unfortunate, and I think there's nothing much to say in that regard other than to condemn it, because it's a product of our lack of regard for health and safety in this country. Our concern for health and safety is very, very marginal, and it just shows how we regard ourselves as humans, and other than that is to say that the emergency response services are also not always up to the mark in dealing with this kind of situations. Many of the cars, many of the vehicles that we see on the roads are actually not supposed to be on the road in the first instance, because they are not roadworthy. Many of them are dilapidated. Many of them are just moving traps ready to consume humans. But of course, we also know that our agencies are weak in terms of operational structure and funding to be able to deal with many of these vehicles. And of course, again, sometimes you may not even want to blame the users of the vehicle, because you will say that they are the only source, the only means around which they can survive. And if we take it off them, or if we put them off the road, they may not be able to survive anymore, because the economy in itself is weak. But it's not to say that because of all these downsides, because of all these problems, we should begin to take human life for granted. I think emergency services have to be much more responsive, and I think our concern for health and safety has to be much more productive and efficient. Because we're not a banana republic, we're not an animal kingdom. We're talking about human lives here, and it matters. The essence of society actually is the preservation of human life. But when we get to a situation where this preservation is becoming questionable, where we can start to question our determination to preserve human life, then we should begin to wear very properly our thinking caps. Biola.
One of the criticisms has been the fact that there's still the federal response versus the state response, and who responds to these type of emergencies. This not, once again, cases whereby the state needs to take more active measures when it comes to responding to emergencies, rather than this also being in the purview of the federal government.
I think the question speaks directly again to how we operate federalism around here. What are the responsibilities of the state vis-a-vis the responsibilities of the federal government, and at what point should it become coterminous? At what point should it dovetail into each other? These are the questions we've been asking at the level of the loud call, the clarion call for restructuring. But be that as it may, when it comes to human life, when it comes to the need for us to respond very quickly to save lives and prevent the destruction of property, we do not have to delay on the ground of shifting or pushing responsibility either to the federal or to the state. We have to be unanimous at the level of response, And if there was a failure in the case of the Onitsha incident, I think it's a shame, really. But it's also a call, for us to be concerned about urban planning, urban planning, and perhaps we should also be thinking about urban renewal, because some of these houses, some of these structures, some of these physical outfits that we see around the cities, are dated, really. They are not this kind of structures we're supposed to see in modern societies. The structures are too close. It makes it very difficult for health and safety to step in the case of emergency. It makes it difficult for emergency response to work, when the need arises. And that's one of the reasons why we could say that the casualty was very high in Indonesia. Sometimes government may also talk about not having funds, but what have we done with the little fund that we have, or that the one we have? Have we really been prudent at the level of management? I think the answer is no. So we have to begin to put some of these things into perspective and deal with them in one swoop, Biola.
Well, I hope there will be an investigation, and our condolences once again to the families of those who have lost loved ones.
Well, speaking of condolences,
absolutely.
Yesterday marked the 33rd anniversary of the assassination of Adeniyi, a revered veteran journalist. For me personally, that marks the end of innocence. As a child, because that's the first inkling that I had that this world could be a rather dark place. What are your personal recollections of that really dark day in Nigeria's history? And beyond that, because a lot of the theories at the time until now relate to an attempt to muzzle him. And what does that say about press freedom under military rule, and press freedom, a term we have to use quite loosely, even though we're now operating a democracy. In spite of constitutional provisions, I mean, we have seen clampdowns on the press to varying degrees of barbarism. Thankfully, not quite at the level of that horrific assassination, a letter bomb, which was, prior to that, unheard of. But what are your thoughts on that really sad anniversary that was celebrated or commemorated yesterday?
A very loaded and valid question, Tudu. Adeniyi is somebody you remember with nostalgia. As a person, I was an undergraduate when he died, and I remember walking on the streets and seeing that banner headline, Adeniyi assassinated by letter bomb, And up to now, he holds the unfortunate record of being one of the few persons assassinated by letter bomb in Africa. The other person is Ruth First, South African anti-apartheid campaigner. And following the life and professional career of Adeniyi, through his column, Parallax Snap, from Concord to Newswatch, you know that he was one of the best that Nigeria ever produced at the level of scintillating prose and at the level of lucidity of thoughts, and the flow of his, the rendition of his ideas. Adeniyi was exemplary. If he were to be alive, he would have been 72 now. We see his contemporaries still around and still doing very well. The legendary Raymond Ekpu, the prose stylist, Dan Agbese, and of course, Yakubu Mohammed. They are all still around. Of course, Adeniyi made his mark, even at 39, and to a very large extent, we can say that sometimes it's not about how long you live on earth, but how well you live the short period that you have lived. We know some of these religious sages who didn't go beyond 30. Yeah, we can console ourselves to that extent and say Adeniyi lived a very good and productive life. But having said that, it's not enough that 33 years after he died, nothing has been done, really. That yes, there were controversies around who killed him and who didn't kill him. But it's a shame that, we tend to have forgotten about the death, that investigations have been stopped. We're no longer hearing anything about the investigation. And I think it's not too late if we reopen the file and continue with that investigation. Because apart from the fact that it was a direct attempt to muffle the press, it was an assault on freedom of speech or freedom of expression, as the case may be. We're talking about human life here, and it just speaks to the fact that anyone's life can be taken just like that, and nothing will come out of it. 33 years after does not matter. I'm not aware there's a statute of limitation around when the investigations around it can stop. If there are new evidence, which I think the government can really continue to find, the government has no reason, or the security agencies have no reasons to stop investigating. We need to get to the root of the matter so that prosperity will exonerate us at the level of, ensuring that we just fulfill all righteousness, because it just takes for granted the fact of death, that anything can happen to anybody and nothing will happen thereafter. It's a very wonderful, memorable, ironic recollection, one that we do with mixed feeling. But be that as it may, Delegiwa was a great man. He will live forever, and may his soul continue to rest in peace.
Amen. Amen.
I know that you are a mass communication professor, a lecturer as well. I would like to know, what do you teach your students about his legacy and also about the state of journalism today? And how do you motivate young journalists to continue to seek the truth in the face of really mounting obstacles when it comes to actually the truth tellers in our society today? How do you teach young people to continue to search and tell the truth?
Yeah, Delegiwa was actually a motivator. His personality was a very rambunctious one. I can remember very clearly. And he was a thinker, a writer, one who had that prowess, a limited one at that, for ideation and for intellection. So he also mixed it. He mixed this trait with an ability to live a good life. I remember he didn't say because he was a public intellectual, because he was a journalist, then he would live a life of poverty. Delegiwa was a very colorful journalist. And he combined it very well with the fact of being a thinker. So he was a very good example of how you can be an experimentalist in terms of lifestyle and in terms of professionalism. He left Concord. Was very, very daring. He left the very famous empire of another legend, Moshood Abiola, incidentally the father of the star close to you there. He left that Concord and went to Newswatch, which shows that he was a media entrepreneur, somebody very entrepreneurial, and he made a success out of it. So besides just being a writer, besides just being a thinker, he was also an entrepreneur, a businessman, showing that journalism is not just about ideation, it's not about thinking and writing, but you can also be combining it with business. He made success out of all these, and all these are clearly encapsulated in his biography written by Dele Onojede and the late Onukaba Adeniyi in Born to Run. It's still a very good book, which I often ask my students to read. If you want to see
we're going to go on a short break. We're going to come right back to you.
Through the prism of Delegiwa.
Welcome back to the morning show. We're still in studio with Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, our analyst and public affairs analyst, looking at the week that was and the headlines that rocked the week. So we're going to switch a little bit to the crisis. I feel like the crisis brewing, or the crisis that's already brewed in Kogi State. The suspension, the impeachment, the hearings. I wanted to get your overall sense of what is going on in Kogi State. How do you think this will be resolved in the end? And what's next for Kogi State?
Yes. Well, what's happening in Kogi State is actually not unexpected. We have seen this kind of incidences in the past. It once happened in Abia State when Oji Kalu was governor, and it happened in Imo State when Rochas was governor, and of course there are so many other instances where we've seen tension, and disagreement, crisis of confidence between the governor and his deputy. And of course, one of them will win at the end of the day. And who is this? It's always the governor winning. Very expectedly, because he holds the levers, he controls the throttle, and he holds the levers of the state. He has the resources, so to say. The buck stop at his desk. So when deputy governors come out, rightly or wrongly, correctly or incorrectly, to challenge the governors by the reason of the Constitution, with the way the Constitution is framed, And with the way democracy operates, you will definitely know that the governor will at some point have the upper hand. And that's what we're witnessing in Kogi. So it's very, very, very much expected. It's not to say that the governor is right or that the deputy governor is correct or incorrect, but we're talking about the way the structure, the way the political practice progress, the way it progresses. The tilt is towards the governor in terms of upper hand. So the fact that the deputy governor has been impeached is expected. I've heard him said that he remains the deputy governor, even though another deputy governor has been identified and probably sworn in. I've had him made that threat. The onus is on him now to proceed to court, like Madumere did in Imo State. But going to court, well, he might be lucky. The court is just there for everybody to go to. But the deed has been done in this circumstance. And do not forget that time is short. The tenure of the present governor is ending about the first quarter of next year. So even if he wins at the court, he has a short time to stay thereafter. But it's important that the point be made, whether he's right or wrong, through the courts, so that history can appropriately place him in the scheme of things, Biola.
Okay. Well, thank you. I guess we'll see what happens in the short time left for the Kogi administration. How do you think that this sort of starts to change the tune around the upcoming elections in Kogi State next year?
Oh, I think the elections are actually going to happen in November. It's the swearing-in that takes place around February. Yes, November.
Oh, the November, yes.
It's actually swearing that takes
this
place
year, actually.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I don't, like I said, the governor is the governor, but Kogi's politics is very complex, Biola. It's a multi-ethnic state, one of the most plural states in the country. And the governor belongs to the minority group, so to say. If he's going to win, it doesn't matter that he's APC. It could be by the skin of his teeth, And the other person running on the platform of the of the equally big party, PDP, is coming from the majority Igala ethnic group, So if voting is going to take place across maybe ethnic or some other kind of popular divides, popular classification that we do know, you will say that, the crisis between Bello and the deputy would not matter. What will matter is, the natural identifications that we cannot do anything about around ethnicity and religion. But Kogi is very complex. It's just for us to sit back and watch, But it's not to say that the governor, too, has no built influence across sections of the state, But like it's naturally expected, we may not be able to place our hands on what definitely will happen until after the election. But it is just safe to say that it's a place of interest, Biola.
Well, that 10 billion naira that the president is seeking approval for might go some way to helping the margins, although it is the reason. The reason being given is that this is a legitimate refund that's due to Kogi State, but, eyebrows have been raised. But I want to change the topic
is everything.
now. Yeah, exactly. I want to change the topic now to the fight against insurgency. During the week, Chairman of the Senate Committee on the Army, Senator Ali Ndume, said that 847 soldiers had been killed by Boko Haram, and also raised alarm about the level of equipment, which is pretty low, and of training. But the army came out to refute only one prong of his comment, which was to do with the numbers. They did not actually offer numbers of their own, which would have been helpful. But what are your thoughts on that? Is it really majoring in the minor for the army to waste time on a statement rebutting that? It's so minor, especially in view of the fact that during the week there was a This Day investigation which revealed that Boko Haram's foreign funding has now risen from 10 or 15% to 50%. Western countries are being implicated like France, and there's now the issue of not just ideology, which we're aware of. We know that sort of Wahhabis would have been financing groups like Boko Haram and what have you. But now there's a monetary, filthy lucre, as in the whole Lake Chad oil exploration, is now casting a sinister shadow over this fight against insurgency. And it's been posited that it's now going to take another 10 to 15 years to beat Boko Haram. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, very well, Tutu. You know, the fight, the insurgency itself is also another very unfortunate thing. You know, it's a major blight, you know, in the annals of this nation's history. You know, and a lot of people have said that it will have been nipped in the bud at the early stages. And some other persons have said that perhaps if there is no allegation of corruption in the security agency, perhaps we will have dealt with it, you know. But my take essentially is that, you know, insurgency is a byproduct of the contradictions in a society like our own. Contradictions that have reigned over the years, contradiction between the rich and the poor, contradictions of illiteracy and literacy, and contradiction around have and have not, you know. And perhaps, again, a product of, you know, long years of proselytization of a section of people, you know, who very, you know, eschatological, believing that, you know, life, physical life in itself does not really matter. You know, that what matters is the life we're going to live after this life, you know, and that life is better, you know, than the physical life we're presently living. So it's a product of people being doctrinaire, you know, believing that, you know, being brainwashed, you know, over years. And the brainwashing does not come on a platter of gold. It comes because of deprivation, and because of long years of denial. So that's what we're seeing. And these things took years to mutate, you know. So it's not something that you're going to deal with just with physical force in one swoop, you know, at once. It will also take time before you can deal with it, because something took years to mutate. You cannot just come and use military force to deal with it just like that. There has to be painstaking ideological reorientation, you know, painstaking education, you know, that will change the perception of people, of this set of people, away from eschatology, away from valuing life and believing that, you know, life is to be lived and legacies are to be left, and you do not have to defer these legacies until life after life. So we need a period of painstaking education, really, other than the military. Yes, it's okay to combine it with the military, but we should not emphasize the forceful aspect of it. You know, so while we're using hard power, we also need soft power. How much of soft power have we been using in terms of ideological reorientation? I'm afraid it may not be sufficient still. We've got to be back at the drawing board and put these things in context so that we can resolve it as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you know, we've been fighting it for nearly 11 years now, and we do not know when it will end. Now, you know, these people, they are mindful of who you are. They do not care whether you're a Christian. They do not care whether you're a Muslim. And they just see you as an enemy because they have a point that they think they need to make. And it's, of course, we cannot overstate the fact that it's very distracting, you know, very scary, you know, and can be continuously disturbing to them.
Thank you. I mean, I think sort of segueing and speaking of the different crises in different parts of the North, I wanted to just sort of talk a little bit about the discovery of a second school in less than a month, an Islamic school in which people are being chained and sexually abused. This really rocked the global headlines. I mean, this was all over global news and also local news. My first question to you is, the challenge we have is really sort of a fallout from unemployment and these ills, is the fact that people are falling on hard times. There are not enough. They're taking drugs. There's not enough institutions to actually rehabilitate people. And so people are turning to Islamic schools in which people are supposed to be learning, but also helping rehabilitate from drugs. And basically, these have become basically torture chambers. Number one, how do we start to deal with this? Because now if we're discovering a second school in less than 3 weeks, there's a big challenge there. The second question to you is, Buhari has responded to say that they will stamp these schools out and these institutions. Do you think that this is an opportunity for the president to actually implement sweeping reforms around Islamic schools and institutions as has been said in the past, and how does he approach that, and since he is probably one of the best placed people to make this reform in Nigeria?
Yeah, Biola, I think the issues are actually related to how Boko Haram came up. You know, if you look at those who have been victims of these so-called training and schools, if they had the opportunity, if they were given arms, of course,
Actually, Dr. Adeniyi, they're just telling me actually that we have a video that we can show. I want to show the video before you respond to the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think the situation became so bad that they could no longer bear it. So I think it was yesterday that they revolted and started rioting and escaping from this facility.
Full it with two. If you do not finish it, they are going to beat you thoroughly. If you vomit, you eat the food together with the vomit. And when you want to go to bathroom or toilet, you will be naked, bathing, and they will be together. They will be caning you. And when you go to bed, when you want to sleep, you will be laid like bags or like dead bodies. 40 people inside one room.
I mean, that is a comment from one of the victims. That is a comment from one of the victims. As you can see, it is horrifying what is happening, and as Tunde and I were saying, only God knows how many of these schools are out there.
I think the situation became so bad that they could no longer bear it. So I think it was yesterday that they revolted and started rioting and escaping from this facility.
Full it with two. If you do not finish it, they are going to beat you thoroughly. If you vomit, you will eat the food together with the vomit. And when you want to go to bathroom or toilet, you will be naked, bathing, and they will be together. They will be caning you. And when you go to bed, when you want to sleep, you will be laid like bags or like dead bodies. 40 people inside one room.
Wow. Dr. Adeniyi, as you can see there, sorry about the fact that we got cut off earlier. As you can see there, that is one of the victims actually talking about his experience. I want to spend a little time talking about this issue because this is one of the critical issues that we need to deal with in our country. And this could be the best time to deal with it. This could be the president that actually deals with this.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Hello?
Yes, it's over to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's right, Biola. I think it's actually very closely linked to what I was talking about earlier. That some of these things are a result of the contradictions in our system. And I dare say that the one who is posing as a teacher, that is assembling these kids and doing all these things to them, probably needs also some kind of mental examination, because you have to be perverted to some extent to be able to met this kind of treatment to fellow humans. And of course, we are not going to take it out of the families of the children as well, who think that they are no longer capable of meeting their responsibility as a family, as parents, and will have to think of sending their children to, one teacher somewhere for information. So it's also combined. It leads us to the question of the number of, it leads us to the question of population control. How many children do we want to have as a family? How many children should the family be entitled to? Does it make sense for us to continue to procreate, just because of some ideological positions that, it is provident, it is God that will take care of kids? What about, the existential realities, the things that you need to care about? You just think that, it leads us to some kind of subhuman kind of thinking. If we just think that procreation is something that should be endless, how much care can you give to the child that you are bringing to the world. It is the state of helplessness that parents and families run into that make them to release their own wards, their own kids, to people who are themselves subhuman, who are obviously perverted and perhaps suffering from some kind of mental deprivation, you know, because, I don't know, we're in the 21st century, it's quite unsightly, quite horrific, like you said earlier, to see people in chains. And of course, I know that the problem is not a result of any religion, you know. The basic idea behind this religion is to educate the child, you know. But so the form is not the problem, but it's perhaps the procedure, the substance of it, the way it is being carried out. It was has become the problem, because we are not the only country in the world where we have Christians, neither are we the only country in the world where we have Muslims. We have Muslims in other parts of the world, just like we have Christians in other parts of the world. You know, and we have not seen many of, even in the theocratic states, we have not seen this kind of horrific sights before. I doubt it really. You know, they may have their issues, you know, but it hasn't been this bad. You know, and it's very, very unsightly, very horrific. Like you said, I agree. You know, President Buhari is in a very good position to deal with it. You know, and I've had, I think one state official mentioned it, that the Aldumanjeri culture is something that needs some level of reformation. It does need some reformation, no doubt, because the way it started in the first instance was just simple Islamic education for children. And it was backed by the colonialists then, as it was, you know, through the instrumentality of the northern emirs. But eventually, you know, there were no structures for them to stay when the colonialists left. There were no structures for them to stay. The state governments also abandoned them, you know, to the malams, you know, who were not taking care of them. But in any case, the malams too couldn't muster the economic resources to fend for them. So they sent them to the streets to beg for arms. And it is the process of begging for arms that is leading to this kind of confinement that we are seeing with humans, kids who are supposed to be the future of tomorrow in chains. You know, very, very unfortunate, very unsightly.
Dr. Adeniyi,
let down on our collective psyche as a people.
Yeah. Dr. Adeniyi, I want us to also talk about the fact that what these institutions have also become is part of rehabilitating people that are on drugs, and how that is also creating a problem, because we're not addressing the issue of the drug challenge that we're having in the North. There was a documentary last year in which the drug issue was exposed, but there hasn't really been a response to actually rehabilitate people that are on drugs or have drug issues. And this is also creating another avenue for these type of grave abuses in these schools. How do we start to even address that? Because we haven't started to even talk about that. And this is one of the reasons why parents are taking their children and young people to these schools. They really think that it is a rehabilitation center.
Well, Biola, I dare say that drug abuse, drug crisis is a problem that you see in many societies. It's not peculiar to us. And countries have actually defined themselves with the way they have tackled it headlong. You know, ours cannot be different. And I've not seen any country that has tackled the problem of drug by leaving it essentially in the hands of some private individuals or in the private sector. You know, it's been the responsibility of the states. I do not know the expertise that these teachers, these rehabilitation centers have in dealing with somebody who is hooked to drug. You know, what expertise do they have? You know, are they licensed? Are they qualified? Or are they just dependent on some voodoo mechanism? You know, or some fetish things? You know, how do we measure it? How do we evaluate their productivity in terms of reforming people? You know, to the best of my ability and understanding, to the best of my understanding, I do know that, you know, the state should be much more, the state will do better in terms of reformation, because we have hospitals, and hospitals are tested and have been tried as better centers for different kinds of healing and for the curing of ailments, not some kind of centers that are nebulous and indefinable, you know. Thinking that anybody can just come out and say, I'm a rehabilitation center, I can help your child. You know, what is the evidence? What is the proof? Are you just not trying to take advantage of them, you know, by turning them into sex slaves, you know, or some kind of pimping? Or are you not just trying to take advantage of innocent ones by turning them into, maybe laborers, people who massage your ego and make you live like kings. These are things that are actually very wrong with our system. And I think it's salutary that the government is stepping in and discovering them and trying to deal with them squarely, as it were, Biola.
Absolutely. It's really cheering to note President Buhari's quick response. He's usually quite reticent, but on this issue, he has been quick to condemn it and in the strongest terms. He had previously announced that he will be banning Almajiri schools, but I was a bit disappointed when Garba Shehu came out to qualify that statement and said it's not an immediate plan, that it will be at some point. But I hope these recent issues with this torture house in Kaduna and in his home state, in his hometown of Daura, really, brings that to the front burner, because it's in the Bible. Who knows if you attained royalty for such a time as this? He's the best placed person to handle this problem. When the former President Jonathan attempted to create this Almajiri schools, it was sort of like, yeah, great, thanks, and nobody really cared, and they were never used. A lot of them are sort of rotting away. They're decaying. Most of them are not even complete, most of the buildings, I believe. So really, we do need urgent action. We were so outraged by what happened in Libya. But this is how we're treating Nigerian children in Nigeria. So let's hope something is done there. And obviously, more budgetary allocation for education is key. And speaking of the budget, I want us to talk about statutory transfers. Everybody talks about health, education, how woefully inadequate the allocations are. The allocations, even now, that have been proposed are woefully inadequate. We talk about the gargantuan debt service bill, recurrent expenditure, but we don't really talk much about statutory transfers. And what has brought this to mind was President Buhari's statement about how he's going to have an audit conducted of the NDDC. That is one of the bodies, one of the agencies, MDAs, that is given statutory transfers, and the budget is not analyzed, it's not scrutinized. NDDC, INEC, NJC, Judicial Commission, even National Human Rights Development, I believe. There are some of these bodies that are just handed over lump sums and nobody checks. What do you think? And National Assembly, before I forget that. We don't scrutinize their budget. Should we go back to pre-2011, especially with regards to the National Assembly? Because it does smack somewhat of hypocrisy when they're going over everybody else's budget with a fine-tooth comb, and theirs is opaque.
Hello?
Doctor?
Yes, yes. Are you back to me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but I think it's okay for us to review these things, time after time, but statutory transfers are coming as a result of government desire to intervene in some key sectors, Perhaps they will have noticed that the problem in those sectors have been long-standing, they've been elongated, and they need some quick dealing, they need some quick intervention, some quick resolution. And that's why we have some of these agencies. Although there have been arguments over the endless multiplication of these agencies. At the time it was 540, and now we are being told that it's over 1,000. We know it wouldn't have been a problem really if they have been up to the mark, if they have been above average in terms of performance. But questions can be asked really around whether or not these agencies, are not just drain pipes, whether they are not avenues for corruption. These are valid questions, but it comes back again to the major issue we've been talking about corruption in the polity. Then on the question of the National Assembly, well, they got 125 billion, as it were, and of course, I see a sense, I see it very unfortunately, though. All
right, Dr.
Adeniyi, often tend to
Dr. Adeniyi, we're going to come right back to you. We're going to take a short break and continue our conversation on the week that was. Welcome back to the morning show. We're still with our public affairs analyst, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. Before we went on break, we were talking about the statutory transfers and actually talking about the National Assembly's budget itself. I'll let you pick up on that, and then we'll wrap that subject up.
Okay. Yes, I was saying that there's a sense in saying that the National Assembly is always the fall guy of everything that is wrong with our democracy. To a very large extent, I think sometimes we are also unfair to them, not as a people, but as an institution, because the National Assembly is the hallmark, the symbol of a democratic experiment. If anything is wrong with the institution, as it were, it's something that we can deal with constitutionally. They are a symbol, they're the symbol, and they've been there for nearly over 20 years now in this new democratic republic. So, yes, I know that we are concerned about prudence, about good management of resources, but again, there are other areas that we can also focus on, other than a concentration on the National Assembly, which we have been doing over the years.
I listed quite a few different agencies, and I don't think transparency or request for transparency constitutes an attack on the National Assembly or a lack of appreciation for the National Assembly. If we can scrutinize the budget of the executive, why not the legislature and the judiciary? Because I also mentioned the NJC.
Definitely. It's absolutely. We need to look at all of them very critically, and of course, not just identify one. It's just about asking our anti-corruption agency to be much more up and doing. They're actually doing their best, but you know that this malaise is very endemic, it's very systemic. It's something that has eaten deep into our very fabric. And of course, if we want to make progress, we cannot shy away from dealing with corruption at every level. So for the government, for the president to talk about NDDC in the first instance, it's also very good. Let that be an inroad. Let that be a pathway towards dealing with this agency. And at the end of the day, probably reviewing whether or not we should have over 1,000 agencies, because as it were, they seem to be drain pipes in the circumstance. Can we match them? How do we make them more productive, much more efficient? How do we? Are we just setting them up as a way to patronize some interest groups? If that is the case, then it's unfortunate, really. Prudence, transparency, quality, and competition are actually what we need, what societies and systems need to propel development. I'm afraid we're not yet there yet, but it's gratifying in the first instance that the president is calling attention to it through his comments on the NDDC. I will hope that we can take it up from there.
Thank you. Speaking of NDDC, this week we found a lot of defensiveness around the forensic audit that the president ordered. What do you think brought on a lot of this defensive conversations? And do you think that, and then yesterday in the headlines, we saw that the Ijaw youth actually want the amnesty program to also go through a forensic audit. What do you think should be part of this journey to more transparency across the agencies? Should we sort of have these regular forensic audits? Should people welcome them? And why are people shying away from and being defensive about these forensic audits?
It's a very delicate thing altogether, Biola, because there's no way you will do forensic audits of any organization and you will not find many things fishy, that you will not find that people have actually dipped their hands into the cookie jar, and sometimes you also see that it's not all about looking at the economic or the sanctimonious aspect of these processes. You also have to be political in making some of these judgments and in embarking on some of these activities. There are political implications. Yes, we are fighting corruption. Yes, we are pursuing prudence, but there's also political implication of trying to probe further. If you overdo these, yes, I know, don't forget, I've said it, the objective is prudence, the objective is anti-corruption, but if you probe again, it could lead to some other questions being asked. It could, arguments may be raised around whether or not you are not trying to target a particular ethnic group because the agency is out to mitigate their pains or solve their problem. That's why sometimes I tend to sympathize with government, because they have to put things in perspective before they take action. But I do believe that government can exonerate itself if they are speak and span, if they are immaculate in their style of operation. And the onus is now on them to do more around this, to just ensure that our objective is noble, and our priority is to bring about sanctity in the way, and sanctity and purity in the way we manage our resources, Biola.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No. I wanted to just go to the issue of the border closure and the expanding conversations that we're having about that. I know we have a quick video that we want to show before we have a conversation with you about that. Let's take a look at that video.
Yeah.
Or not. Okay. Just give us a minute. I think that we have a video for the border closures conversations.
For as long as it will take our neighbors to come to the table, sit down, and agree to execute exactly what was agreed upon during the Obasanjo time. Simple adherence to transit procedure. That has not happened. That is the ultimate desired goal of this operation. So time limit is not anything that we can talk about now. It will continue for as long as we get the desired result. It is important to note that 95% of illicit drugs and weapons that are being used for acts of terrorism and kidnapping in Nigeria today come in through our porous borders. However, since this partial closure, the acts have become drastically reduced. Our conclusion is that the arms and ammunition these terrorists and criminal elements were using no longer gains access into the country. Goods that are on the prohibition list of Nigeria, such as rice, used clothing, poultry products, etc., and vegetable oil, should not be exported to the country. As a result of this closure, Niger Republic has already circulated an order banning exportation of rice in any form.
Well, thank you for that video. Dr. Adeniyi, this week we heard that the borders will be closed indefinitely. There's now been even more outcry. I just wanted to get your sense of how do we continue and how do you run a country where you're shutting down the borders indefinitely for results that are debatable? Briefly, because I think we're rounding up with you.
Oh yeah. I think the continued closure is actually unacceptable. Because we're talking about signing the African Trade Agreement, and we cannot think that it's only when we're back on these knee-jerk episodic measures, extreme measures, for instance, of closing the border, that will solve our problem. There must be some things that we need to do. I think the agencies can probably sit back and rethink this action, really. But somehow we've discussed it in the past and said that it is tailored towards protectionism. But how do you continue to protect your territory, to protect your products, your goods and services by resorting to extreme measures? Government will need to take a second look. But this process, this action, is not one that is sustainable. Something will have to be done, really.
Well, thank you, Dr. Adeniyi. I think what you're saying is that we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, which shouldn't be that hard. I think that we're going to continue to see some outcry on that. Tundu, I know we're going to go on a short break. Do you have anything to add about the border closures?
Unfortunately, one at a time. Next time.
Saved by the bell. Thank you once again, Dr. Adeniyi. We look forward to seeing you again.